Hi, I know we usually meet on Sundays, but I thought I would do a holiday special. In case this is your first episode, I'm your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller by profession, so the way I do my job is by podcast. Given the season, I have a story for you about an old man with a white beard who is very generous and gives out gifts. I'm not talking about the gentleman who lives at the North Pole, but rather about a poor old grass cutter in the Indian subcontinent a few centuries ago. The grass cutting profession is self descriptive, but you don't just cut grass, you make it into a bundle and then sell it. Walidad cut grass every day and sold it to pretty much anyone who had a horse, because these horses preferred grass to oats. Each day for 50 years, Walidad cut and then sold a bundle of grass for 5 paise or 5 cents. Inflation wasn't much to speak of and no taxes were necessary. Walidad spent exactly 4 paise every day on food and clothing and saved off the last one. It's not that he wanted to save it, it's just that he had no use for it. So he dropped it in his own personal piggy bank, which was in his hut. He had no incidental expenses and didn't take any vacations or donate to any charity. This was mainly because the tourism industry didn't exist. And Walidad was poor enough himself that it didn't even occur to anyone to solicit a charitable contribution from him. After 50 years of saving up a paisa each day, Walidad finally decided to check how much he had, and was surprised to discover that he had a pretty big pile. To most people, this would have been a pleasant surprise. Not to Walidad. He had no use for this extra money. I mean, anyone else would have considered retiring or maybe upgrading from his simple mud hut, or tattered clothes, or even just getting a better scythe. But not Walidad. He didn't care for a tuxedo or a shopping spree at Home Depot. Instead, he took all his money in to the jeweler. The jeweler, an honest man, would not take the money without giving Walidad something in return. "Alright, if it's all the same to you, I will take something," said Walidad. He picked up a beautiful bracelet of gold encrusted with several precious stones. He had no use for the bracelet either. It couldn't cut grass, and he couldn't eat it or wear it. But it was a really pretty bracelet, and Walidad resolved to find the right owner for it. As luck would have it, he ran into a merchant who was known to have traveled the world. And no, this merchant's name was not Sinbad the Sailor. Let's call him Seth, which literally means merchant. "Seth," Walidad addressed him, "tell me, in your travels, who is the most virtuous lady you know of?" "Definitely the Princess of Khaistan, and Florence Nightingale," was Seth's reply. "And who's closer?" asked Walidad. "The princess," said the merchant. "Next time you're in her territory, would you please give her this bracelet as a gift from me?" asked Walidad. Despite seeing Walidad's tattered clothing, and how by contrast the bracelet was definitely expensive, Seth didn't call the police. "Without a doubt," said the merchant. "I'm going there right now. And what's more, since you're a first-time customer of mine, I won't even charge you any fees this time. Now tell me, are you asking me to transport any weapons, firearms, or explosives?" "No, it's a bracelet," said Walidad. "I still have to ask or I'll lose my license," said the merchant. "Does it have lithium-ion batteries? Any combustible substances?" "No, of course not," said Walidad. "A bracelet doesn't have batteries." The merchant ignored him and continued. Did you pack your package yourself? Did someone give you something to transport on their behalf? No, said Walidat. I own everything, and I didn't even pack it. I'm giving you this bracelet without any packaging on it. All right, said the merchant. Just sign the customs declaration form here and here. Sign here to acknowledge that in no circumstances will you hold me liable for damages or delays. Walidat did sign it, and the merchant took the bracelet. He went dashing through the sand in a one-camel open cart, and after a few days presented the bracelet to the princess of Khaistan as a gift from the noble Walidat. The princess was impressed. The bracelet was stunning and suited her perfectly. She decided, on the basis of absolutely nothing, that someone who chooses to send such a lavish gift to a complete stranger must be ridiculously rich. She thought, I must send back something so that he doesn't really think any less of Khaistan. In the first place, it might seem wrong for a princess to accept gifts from complete strangers. I mean, there's got to be an emoluments clause in there somewhere. Oh wait, this is the era where the monarchy had absolute decision-making powers over everything, and their word trumped all laws. So basically accepting such gifts was quite okay. She sent back a camel laden with the finest silks in the land. The merchant was happy to take that back to Walidat. Written gifts weren't unusual in the merchant's business. In fact, on the last trip, in exchange for a toy, the return gift had been some delicious cookies and some milk. What was different here was that the return gift seemed much more valuable than the original gift. In a few days, when the merchant presented the camel with the fine silks to Walidat, Walidat was shocked. He had not expected to receive more than what he started off with. The merchant would bail him out though. Walidat asked him to take the camel and the silks to the most virtuous gentleman he knew of. Of course, said the merchant. That would be the Prince of Nekabad. Walidat said, fine, to the Prince of Nekabad then, and you can keep some of the silks for yourself for transportation costs, camel maintenance, insurance and all that. This was a bad move for Walidat. The prince had an identical reaction to the princess of Khaistan. He sent back lavish gifts too, gold and silver on horses. Now, at this point, if you were Walidat, you should quit giving out gifts to people who don't need them, and instead maybe gift the poor and the needy. And if Walidat really wanted to put a stop to this, he could have, by simply accepting one of the gifts and not sending it on. But no, he hadn't learned his lesson. On went some of the horses with gold and silver back to the princess of Khaistan. And her subsequent gifts were routed to the prince again. While Walidat was just acting as a broker, channeling gifts from the prince to the princess and back, the prince and the princess had developed grandiose notions of the noble Walidat. The merchant was starting to get a bit fed up. Sure, he was earning more than he ever had just by keeping the fraction that Walidat gave him. But this wasn't sustainable. He wasn't equipped to transport such riches. He would have to upgrade his fleet of camels. He'd need to hire armed guards and probably be taxed in a higher bracket come April. He resolved that this would be his last trip for Walidat. But after the most recent round of gifts, the princess concluded, again based on absolutely nothing at all, that Walidat was seeking to marry her. So she decided to accompany the merchant back herself to meet this generous man. The merchant knew he was in a world of trouble now, but still far too afraid to admit it. He sneaked ahead to warn Walidat. Walidat despaired at the situation and concluded that he would be blamed and therefore executed when the princess got here. He did the only thing he could think of. He went up into the hills to find a quiet, nice cliff to jump off of. On the way, he met a couple of fairies. "Where are you going?" they asked him. He told them his whole story. But now he was in a bit of luck. "Listen, Max," said one of the fairies. "We have an inventory problem on our magic just this week. The magic dust factory operated by this Nigerian prince sent us more dust than we can use. We want to perform some magic without causing too much trouble, and we could help you out just this once." "Okay, what bank details do you need?" asked Validad. "Nothing, we don't need bank details. It's really for free. Just don't go thinking you can get anything more. No more freebies. Oh, and the magic wears off in a week, so get your problem solved by then." Fairies disappeared, and then Validad was surprised to discover that his clothes had magically changed into very rich ones. He rushed back home to discover his mud hut was now a palace. Overjoyed, he had the merchant send a message to the prince to come visit Validad. The princess, who was now nearby, was very pleased when she finally met Validad. But it was clear he wasn't interested in marrying her, and she wasn't interested in him either. A grand feast was being held, quite like the banquet at the end of each Asterix book. The prince arrived soon, and just as Validad had hoped, the prince and princess liked each other. They had arrived separately, but they left as a couple. Validad had had a hard time adjusting to the rich clothes and palace life. He didn't like having to tie a tie and to be well dressed all the time. And frankly, he missed 7 days of grass cutting. Luckily, just after the prince and princess left, the magic began to wear off. Soon, Validad was back in his tattered clothes and in his mud hut. He couldn't have been happier. Now, in this story, everyone is assumed to be incredibly honest. The jeweler, the merchant, and of course Validad. Which pretty much proves how this is a work of fiction. If it were real life, Validad wouldn't have managed to save much money, because his piggy bank would have been burgled several times over 50 years. And even if it hadn't, the jeweler would have simply kept all the money without offering the bracelet in exchange. And failing that, the merchant would have sold off the bracelet himself. It's unreasonable how many times the gifts are exchanged, and yet Validad doesn't stop forwarding the gifts. Personally, I don't like the fact that the deception continues with Validad's temporary palace and rich clothes. I wish he had been open with the princess and the prince. It's not like they weren't soon going to discover that they had some of each other's gifts. The possibility of being executed was more important to Validad than sticking to his "I don't care about money" principle. Although, he needn't have worried. The prince and princess that he had picked were the most virtuous. They wouldn't execute him. After all, he didn't lie to them or anything. That's all I have for this week. Thanks again to all you listeners, and especially to everyone who provided feedback. Thanks to all my family and friends for their support. And I wish everyone happy holidays. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. And I'll see you again on Sunday.